maybe we should start with a look back at the games and our relationship with them, and what we thought of them, of course. So, Tommy, I know you're a big fan, so do you want to start us off?
Big fan, yes, of course. The Last of Us is one of those seminal experiences in gaming, in my opinion. I mean, if you had a PS3 back in the day, you had to play The Last of Us. It was a new cinematic adventure game from Naughty Dog.
Is it as old as the PlayStation 3?
Yeah, 2013, I think it came out.
Yeah.
It was PS3, then, it really popped off with the PS4 and the re-release, the remastered that they did. They remastered that game 1,000 times.
I'm pretty sure they're still releasing remasters of that game.
Yeah. But Naughty Dog, is famous for the Uncharted franchise, which at the time I don't think I had played. But what I did play from Naughty Dog were the Jak and Daxter games. Have you ever played those?
Oh, used to love those games. Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite video game series growing up, I think. So, Naughty Dog, great pedigree, pardon the pun.
Did they not? Are they Crash Bandicoot as well?
They did the first few Crash Bandicoot, yes. The new ones are made by a different studio. They don't have the rights anymore. Toys for Bob probably made the last one, the It's About Time.
Right. Another great series as well. I grew up on the Crash Bandicoot games. Absolutely love them.
Yeah, they reference Crash a few times in the Uncharted series too. I think in the fourth one you have a little throwback level from the first Crash Bandicoot as well. So yeah, I mean, Naughty Dog is one of those studios that even people who are not really super familiar with gaming and video game studios, they know the name. It's a well-respected name. But yeah, The Last of Us is good. It's great even. It's one of those stories that really grab you. I remember the feeling of not being able to put the controller down. I was so engrossed in this story, in these characters. I care about them so much. I heard people say that it's a cliche story. I don't know if you agree. It's The Road meets The Walking Dead. And, sure, I don't care.
It's certainly not insanely original, but it's just really well executed, and it's not necessarily the plot or the premise, it's the characters which really excel.
I agree with that. I think, it's the characters that make the story. And at the time, especially, we didn't have many characters in gaming that were as strong and as real, if you will, as Joel and Ellie. And also, I think the ending of that game makes this story great. And it's so great, in fact, that one could argue that we didn't really need a part 2. But, getting ahead of myself, I guess.
Yeah, because I'm not as familiar with the games. I was always on Xbox back then, so I didn't actually have a PlayStation when it came out, but I obviously knew that it was really good and saw all the sort of applauds that it got.
Yeah, it was in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, so I went and sort of watched somebody do a gameplay sort of walkthrough of the whole thing, and so I've experienced the game in that sense. And yeah, I thought the story was fantastic, but does it end like the show ends?
Yeah, it's like beat for beat, shot for shot, the same thing.
So the final moment is is Joel lying to Ellie.
Yeah, she asked him to swear that what he told her about what happened in Salt Lake City with the Fireflies, that they didn't really find a cure, all those things that he lied about. She asked him to swear that all of that is true, and he swears, yes, it's true. And then they continue on and they go to live in Jackson, which is the setting of season 2 as well, one of the main hubs in the game and in the show. But like going back to the game for a second, because I wanted to say something that I think it's really important, because the gameplay of The Last of Us, is serviceable. It's not one of those, it's classic action adventure story with, some horror sprinkled throughout. But the story, as we said, is what makes the game great. And also, something that I find really interesting in The Last of Us is the depth of the character's psychology and the way the more gamey aspects of the game actually serve the story. I'm thinking about Joel and his selfishness, right? Which is a character trait that we see very well expressed in the TV show as well through Pedro Pascal, which I thought did an amazing job as Joel. His roughness, his detachment, it's what allowed him to survive all this time in the post-apocalypse. And the way Ellie kind of breaks through that barrier, it's also what triggers something deep within Joel, a protective instinct that leads us to this very powerful ending, to him killing everyone to save her, to dooming humanity because he doesn't want to lose his surrogate daughter, his daughter again.
Yeah, and it's definitely, you can see he's warming up to her, but he's so closed off because we've always, at this point, he's already lost his daughter, he's lost Tess.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't necessarily want to let anybody else in case, of fear of losing them again.
And then there's always this funny thing, there's always this element of dissonance in games like this, like Uncharted, another Naughty Dog game. Don't know if you've ever played those, but Nathan Drake is supposed to be this kind of like lovable asshole character. But if you look at the reality of what's happening on screen, he has killed thousands of people across 4 games. So it's like a mass murderer.
Yeah, yeah.
And in The Last of Us, Joel's brutality is actually part of the story. It even justifies his behavior at the end. He's such a monster that is willing to kill all these people just to save one person that he cares about. Then that's one of those things that work a little less in the show.
Yes.
Because you only have a few key scenes where we see Joel's brutality, and he comes across a little bit softer, a little bit less of a murdering psychopath. It's enough, I guess, but like it's one of those things that is lost when you're not playing as him. There's something lost when you translate a story like this, even though it's very cinematic, very TV show-like.
Yeah.
There's always something lost when you change the medium in which you tell a story.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, like you said, those mechanics actually completely undermine the story sometimes. Like, you have your character, you're working your way to get to a cutscene, and this cutscene is talking about, you being the good guy, and you've brutally murdered 30, 50 people just to get there. And it's like that just goes unspoken a lot of the times, and obviously it can be a bit silly. And it seems like the second one has a lot of that. They don't work the mechanics of the game as well into the part 2, because again, I haven't played part 2, but I watched somebody play through the story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many scenes where Ellie's killing dogs.
Oh yeah, so many dead dogs.
And it's like it's a bit of a hard watch. And then the whole thing is her dealing with, should she be a killer? Should she not?
Yeah.
I think she's already done it, because we've seen her kill 50 dogs already in the first hour of the game.
This is probably what I should say, that we have a video essay coming out here on the channel. Should be out next week, maybe a little later. I'm working on it right now. In that essay, I go into some of my issue with part 2. That's pretty cool, I think, personally. So, check it out when it comes out. But yeah, I agree 100% that the amazing way they kind of use the dissonance in the first game is not used as well in the second one. There are so many moments where agency is taken away from you. You feel like you need to do stuff that you don't really want to do.
Yeah.
Which, the ending of the first game was so powerful because you felt like you were doing something wrong, but also like you had no choice. Of course, I'm going to save Ellie because you spent so much time with her. You love her. You love this character. You grew to know her, and you don't want to see her die. For what reason? To save this war that tried to kill you for 12 hours. So it was amazing, and they forgot. they kind of forgot in the second game. I like the second game, but like some of that stuff doesn't really work as well.
So you'd say you still, because obviously the second game nowhere near as revered as the first. I think people still hold it highly in terms of its graphics and its visuals and great cutscenes, but in terms of obviously the gameplay, it doesn't develop much from part 1 and part 2. And then also,
I mean, it didn't really have to, reinvent the wheel that much. It's still kind of like a cinematic horror movie.
No, but I think any time you do a sequel to a game, or you're bringing out the next part of a series, I think if you're not improving gameplay mechanics at all, then you're a bit stagnant. And all this is a cutscene game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, they've introduced some stuff, but they didn't really use it that well. Like, I think of that rope mechanic that they have in the game. Like, sometimes in the game, you have to, like, take this rope. You need to throw it. You need to solve puzzles using ropes. And it's like 2 or 3 puzzles in the whole game. And that rope mechanic, it's so incredible. Like, you throw this rope, and it just really...
Oh, yeah.
It looks like a real rope.
The physics of it are fantastic.
The physics are insane, and you barely see it. You barely use it. So like I don't know. I guess they had other priorities, but
yeah. So you'd say you still really enjoyed part 2 of the game?
I mean, I think my main issue with part 2, and we will probably get into this when we review the first episode of the second season, is pacing. I hate the way the story is told. Not the story itself, even though there's some stuff in the story that I don't really love, I guess. But like, I think what hurts The Last of Us Part 2 the most is pacing, is the way the story is told. The way we keep stopping and going, flashbacks, and then you go back and you change perspective. You are a different character for a while, then you go back to the other character, and then there's a flashback again. That is just frustrating. You keep losing track of what you need to care about, because so many times in the game they decide to make you do something else that you don't care about. Maybe you would care if the story was presented in a different way. I mean, we don't want to go into spoilers, of course, but like maybe there's like a very intense sequence that like you're really invested in, and then the game is like, okay, now time for a flashback about this character going through the woods with this other character we've never met. And maybe that sequence would have been great if it wasn't positioned there,
Yeah.
like if it wasn't there in the story.
And I think that's done purposefully to be, to be almost a bit edgy, or it's like, oh, well, this is going to be so unformulaic how we tell this story. But yeah, you have obviously, yeah, maybe we don't want to say about that moment of what happens.
No.
You have your new character coming in and sort of taking over from the main beloved character in the series, does something heinous, and then now forces you to play and enjoy that new character. And it's like, why would you, it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough sell to try and get you to like this person. And just is that just a bad idea, actually? So yeah, obviously part one of the game's fantastic, one of seminal games that's been made in the last few decades. And part two, obviously not not as good, caused a lot of controversy. But yeah, I mean, and how do you think the show, season one in particular, did in portraying that story?
My overall thoughts are that I think the show does a great job at adapting the game. I am disappointed at some of the changes, naturally, having experienced the game first. That's just, I think you can't escape that. But I think overall they found the right balance between recreating the best moments from the game and add some other stuff that helps flesh out the world and tells a story where the main tension can't come from the feeling of, oh my God, I'm going to die now. But they have to rely on, plot progression and episode by episode unraveling these characters, putting them in situations that tell us more about them and about the story. I still prefer the game in some aspects, but I believe this one is one of the better game adaptations that we got.
What are those significant changes from the game that you didn't like in the series?
So there's some stuff that they decided to change, which I just find weird. Like the whole sequence that's placed in the middle of the game where you meet with Henry and Sam, the two brothers.
Yeah.
In the game, you go through various locations, you fight infected, you fight raiders, and then what happens in this show happens in the game too. It's a very harrowing scene, really well done. But in the show, they decide to place the story within this larger conflict between the Fedra, it's kind of like police force of the post-apocalypse, and the inhabitants of this city who took over the government, let's call it, of the city, and on this leader. And this leads me into one of the criticisms that I have of the show, which is the casting. Some of the casting is a bit meh.
I thought you might bring up. Have you ever seen 2.5 Men?
Some of it, yeah. Don't love it, but
It's like that Charlie Sheen sitcom back in the day.
yeah.
The leader of that group,
Melanie Linsky.
yes, she plays Charlie Sheen's like obsessed stalker neighbor.
Okay.
And so I couldn't, and I've never really seen her in much else other than that.
I guess she's scarier in that too.
Oh my God. I mean, terrible casting. That was at the point where, yeah, I mean, the show started to lose me a bit when they're sort of introducing her character and her story. It's just not threatening as a villain at all.
Yeah, so Melanie Linsky, for those who haven't seen the show in a while, she plays this leader of the human faction. She's on a revenge path. They want to do this kind of like sweet lady turned ruthless leader kind of thing, but she doesn't feel that imposing. She dies quite quickly. I think over the course of 2 episodes, she just dies. So yeah.
But gets a lot of screen time in those 2 episodes. She's really heavily focused on, and like you said, dies very quickly.
Yeah, they want to do this thing. There's a lot of parallels in the show, and some of them really work well. Like I think the Bill character and the way it mirrors Joel and all that, the whole episode that they do with him and Frank, I thought was very touching, very well done. It's a little bit of a departure from everything else that we've seen in the show, but I think it works in creating this connection. Like the story is about this, it's about love, it's about caring about someone else, it's about putting your life in danger because you want to save that person. Yeah. So the themes are well expressed in that episode. about Bill. And then when we go back to Joel and Ellie, we have a newfound understanding of what the story wants to be about. But with this character, they want to clearly create a parallel. She wants to avenge her brother, who Henry got killed. She wants to kill him and his little brother, but he wants to protect his little brother, who's also deaf.
And her brother who died was the sort of leader, the de facto leader
Yeah.
of this group.
She took over.
And now that's how she's taken the position, which at least makes sense, because it's, there is an element of like before you learn that backstory, I'm thinking, why the hell is everybody taking orders from this lady? But
yeah, no, it's insane.
So she's an original character.
She's an original character. I understand the need to introduce like a new kind of conflict. The interesting thing is that the highest moments of tension in the show are the moments where in the game you're actually just putting down the controller and enjoying a little cutscene, because the high tension moments are when you're playing and you're dying because the fucking clickers and raiders are trying to kill you. So it's interesting to see how they have to change the structure of the story to make it more engaging and more interesting. And they come up with this storyline, but I don't think it works. And also it's resolved so quickly. And I think one of the biggest issues in general with the show is how quickly some of these stories are resolved. Like, for example, the actor who plays David, the leader of the cannibal group. Yeah. Scott Shepard is his name. That actor fucking killed it. He's one of the best. He's probably better than David in the game. He's so good. He's so just creepy and imposing, and just like you can feel how horrible he is inside, even though he tries to play the good guy.
It's a really good scene when he's talking to Ellie in the prison cell, and he's like trying to sort of rationalize their turn to cannibalism. That was a really good scene.
Yeah, it's straight from the game. So well done. Perfect casting, even though it looks different. Like, I don't care that characters look different from the game, but like, he's just perfect. But I felt maybe they could have stretched that story over a couple of episodes, ratcheting up the tension a little bit more, making you really fear for Joel's life, for Ellie's life. I think it just gets resolved in one episode, and that episode is fucking amazing. But the game, the winter section of the game, lasts a few hours. You play as Ellie, you need to hunt, then you come across these characters, and then you need to escape the infected, and then you need to find a medicine for Joel, and then Joel needs to rush to save her, and then you have to kill this guy as Ellie. It's insane. It's so well done, and the tension builds up over hours of gameplay. And here you just get the kind of like cliff notes, the best moments, and there's no much action, which again, I understand. Another complaint that I have is the lack of infected in the show.
Yeah.
I felt it less the second time that I watched it. The first time I was like, okay, when is the next clicker scene coming? And it never did. This time I enjoyed the story more, I think, on a second watch, because I appreciated kind of like the pacing of it a little bit more instead of comparing it to the game all the time. But still, I feel like a couple of more scenes with the infected should have been added.
You're definitely right. That I think that was a complaint that a lot of people had. They are very, there's only a few big moments where we're in conflict with the clickers, and it's a shame, because they're done so well in the series. Like, they look fantastic, and the way they're the actors they're getting to perform. I think there's one of the clickers in season 1 who's played by some fairly famous gymnast or something, and they were doing some insane movements with it. And yeah, they are, I think, easily some of the most captivating bits, the encounters with the clickers, and it definitely doesn't happen enough in season 1. Just what you were saying before as well about the pacing towards the end of the show, and it felt a bit rushed, some of those episodes. That's why I personally have a bit of an issue with episode 3. Not that I don't think it's a fantastic episode. It's a really great little what do you call this? Like it's a type of episode.
A vignette?
A vignette, or
like
a bit like the
not a bottle episode.
Bottle episodes, kind of like the Fly in Breaking Bad. We're not necessarily moving any plot or anything, but we're exploring themes here. I don't think you can do that in the 3rd episode of a series. It's way too early to be doing stuff like that.
I agree.
Going from we really needed to establish Joel and Ellie's relationship more, and come episode 4, I didn't feel that, because we had spent a whole episode away from those characters. And if anything, in the first half of the season, the best developed characters are Frank and Bill, which it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, fair. I think it's the placement in the series that really robs the episode itself of its strength. And if it was a longer season, with more episodic moments here and there, but it's a tight 9-episode show. So I get your criticism, and I feel like the Riley episode, the flashback episode with Ellie, is also.
Because that was part of the DLC as well, wasn't it? So
Yeah,
that's
that
not
was
even
literally
part
a
of
DLC.
yeah.
They just added in because, well, I mean, it's backstory for Ellie. It makes sense to include it, but it does stop. I still remember this meme that came out with that episode. I'll try to put it on the screen if I find it, but basically it's like this lady just laying there with a caption, Joel bleeding out on the floor while Ellie is having a flashback about Riley. It's like this woman just like thinking back.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're not. Then those two parts are not positioned well in the first series, and I also think, to me, when I first watched it, and I know a lot of other people had this reaction as well, it really was. It came across a bit virtue signaling. Like it was like, oh,
Yeah,
I want to do in my first series this big gay love story, and this is the one that's going to be up for all the Emmys and get all the applauds and etc. etc. And it's like, and it's don't take away from it. It was a fantastic episode. And what's his face? Who plays Bill? What's his name?
Nick Offerman
Nick
is so
Offerman
good.
is amazing. He's so damn good in that. And I think that's why I didn't necessarily hate it. It was still a good episode, but it just
Yeah.
it annoyed me in what it was doing.
It feels like it was made for the wrong reasons. It was made to be like, oh, this is not just a video game adaptation. We are trying to make art here. So let's put a little love story here and, underrepresented groups and whatnot. It feels like The Last of Us had these themes. It's an interesting difference with the game. Bill in the game is completely different. It's just a guy that Joel and Ellie go to after the events of Tess dying. They don't know where to go. They go there to get a car from Bill. And there's a whole mission, I guess, where you have to go into this school to find a battery for this truck that you're going to use to move across the country. And Bill helps you, and this very curmudgeon character who finds Ellie and Joel just a disturbance in his daily life of killing infected and living by himself. But we do get the hint of his sexuality, and we learn about his relationship to this guy named Frank. But the relationship is completely different. At some point in the game, I believe you find Frank's body, like he hanged himself.
Okay.
So there were two characters who, like it was a different kind of story that they were telling in the game. And I enjoy the change, honestly. I think, as you said, Nick Offerman is great. The other guy, I forget the name, was also really good in the episode. They link it back to this relationship with Tess and Joel and, to the themes of the story. So it works. But I agree with you. The placement was weird. And I feel like they wanted to highlight right away these topics that they know they win awards, I guess.
Totally. And what other great television series completely goes away from your main characters and your plot and does a very thematic based episode in the first season? I don't think I can't think of one that does that. Yeah, and it put a lot of people off the show. It certainly didn't deter me, and I still enjoyed it. But yeah, just that should have come way later in the story.
Yeah, I did enjoy it more the second time because, again, you knew it was coming. So you were just, and maybe watching it, like binging it instead of watching it week by week.
You knew it
I
was
was
coming. You knew it was
satisfied.
coming, so you couldn't be severely disappointed about it.
Yeah, no, but like the first two episodes are really great and they're very action packed. So, it's a nice little change of pace when you watch the season as a whole and you're binging through it. But when you're waiting week by week and you get an episode where you barely see your main two characters and you spend time in the past in a story that doesn't really have any bearings on what we're witnessing now, it does feel frustrating, and I understand the criticism. But that first episode, and then we should probably move to season 2, or we're going to stay here all day. But first episode is brilliant, and it's a brilliant example of how they adapted the game well. Because in the game, we start on the night of the outbreak, right? And we play as Sarah, Joel's daughter. And they escape the house, and, we get to all the way to that moment where she sprains her ankle and Joel has to carry her away. That's the first time we take control of Joel. And then, the most harrowing sequence in all of gaming. She dies and you have to cradle her as she bleeds out on the ground. And then we cut to 20 years later. But it's very smart in the show to instead follow her for the whole day, because just like in the game, the show kind of like lulls us into this sense of, okay, people are turning into zombies. We're gonna follow these father and daughter as they escape the invasion. If you don't know anything about the story, you kind of like expect that to be the plot. And then you're hit with that brick of a twist that it still haunts me to this day. Still wake up screaming in the middle of the night. And I think the way they did it in the show was really, really well made. And they didn't do it all the time, which is annoying. But, props for that.
Yeah, I thought the first episode was really good, and especially when they are just ripping shot for shot from the game is when the show is at its best, to be honest. Like, the sequence in the car when they're going through the town. We have a few of those also later, like when Joel's up in the house with the sniper with Sam and Henry and Ellie.
Yeah.
Like, those are almost shot for shot from the game, and that's when the show is at its best, to be honest. What I was also going to say, what was some of your sort of favorite moments from the first season?
So I guess that's cheating. All the moments that were taken straight from the game with these new actors. There's a few lines that change, but they're mostly intact. The confrontation between Ellie and Joel when they have to leave from Jackson to kind of like do the last stretch of their journey, and he wants to kind of leave her with Tommy, but she doesn't want to be abandoned again, I guess, and they have this incredible scene. I mean, in the game, it's even cooler because she runs away with a horse, and you have to run after her, and then you reach this house, this abandoned house on a hill, and she has hid in this room, who was a girl's room before the outbreak. And so she's like reading through her diary, and he comes through the door, and it's basically like a dad talking to her teenage daughter, and it's the first time that you kind of like see them as that, and it's so well made. And then they have the conversation that they also have in the show. In the show, it's a little bit simpler. She's still in Jackson, she's just in a room and he walks in, but it's still very powerful, and the actors do a fantastic job. I think Bella Ramsey got a lot of shit because she doesn't look like the character, and I don't really get that. I understand that maybe there were actors that looked more like Ellie from the game. We mentioned Kaylee Spaney recently.
Yeah.
She would have been perfect, but she nailed the performance in season 1. We'll see what happens with season 2. I have thoughts on that. We'll talk about it in a couple minutes, I guess. But she really nailed those scenes.
See, for me, it took me a while to warm to her in season 1, and it wasn't necessarily just a look. I don't know whether her performance in the earlier ones is that great, and also her relationship with Joel. It wasn't until the scene when they hold up in that big abandoned building and they put the glass all around them, and it's when Sam and Henry end up finding them, and she's been cracking the jokes from her book to him,
love those,
all throughout the last few episodes, but then she finally gets him to break when they're sleeping, and he like lets out a little laugh, and it's the first time we see Joel experience a bit of like positive emotion for a while anyway. And that was the moment where I felt like they had started to have a really good connection and display on screen together.
That's a very good moment. And also, I feel like I've already said this, I guess, but rewatching in the show and kind of like binging a few episodes a day, you really feel the progression in their relationship, which is something that I didn't really feel the first time when I watched it week by week. I felt like it didn't really work that well as it did this second time that I watched it. Like, I feel like you can really see Joel's resistances slowly fading away as he kind of like embraces this new role as a protector for Ellie. I thought that was really well done.
Is she as endearing and likable in season 1 Ellie and part 1 of the game Ellie? Is Bella Ramsey's portrayal of the character as likable? And
I think she's spot on.
Yeah.
I mean, game Ellie, she's still very direct, very foul-mouthed, you could say. She says fuck a lot, but I do feel like, and it's a necessity of the show, they amp it up a little bit because they have less time to establish her. So like she's way more aggressive in the beginning, when this is a side of her that you don't really experience at first. You learn more about her at the start in the show compared to kind of like slowly learning about her by just being with her in the game. They had to make choices, and we'll see with season 2 they have to make a few choices that I don't know if they will work, honestly. But yeah, I think generally they did a very good job, and she did a very good job. I wasn't enamored with the performance at first either, but episode 2 I was sold. I was like, okay, she's Ellie, that's fine.
It took me a little bit longer to warm up, but I definitely, like I said, from that moment, so that was kind of in the mid-season, I did start to warm up to their relationship a lot more.